Hey everyone, this is Game Dev Luke and welcome to part 2 of our weapon generator series. Last time we generated weapons using several gun parts. Now we're gonna add functionality to these gun parts. So we're gonna add things like damage, accuracy, reload speed, rate of fire, and that kind of thing. The second thing we're gonna add in this series is we're gonna add rarity. Our gun parts are gonna be using this system. So they're gonna be uncommon, common, rare, epic, and legendary. And we're also showing all of these statistics and the rarity in the user interface. So we're gonna make an item card or a weapon card. So in part 2, we're gonna have our generated gun. This gun is gonna have unique statistics like damage, reload speed, accuracy, and that kind of stuff. It's gonna have a certain rarity, and it will all summarize or show in the user interface. Let's go. All right, so we're back in Unity for part 2. So what we did in the previous part, I'm going to show right now. We have this. When I press my spacebar, you see random generated weapons. Yeah, well, they are randomly generated, but they don't have any functionality yet. So they don't do any damage or reload speed or that kind of stuff. They're just models that are slapped together and they look quite cool. But in this tutorial, we're going to add statistics. And I'm going to do this by making a new script called weapon part. In weapon part, we're going to start with an enum called weapon stat type. And in this enum, we're going to have our stats. So we're going to have damage, and you can add whatever you want, of course. But for now, we're going to do damage, accuracy, ammo per clip, reload speed, fire rate. So these are our statistics. Now I want to make a new public class, weapon stat pair. And this class is gonna hold a statistic. So this is gonna be, for example, damage. And I want this class to have a minimum stat value and a maximum stat value. And I will explain why we do this in a bit. And then I want a list of this class, so weapon stat pair. And I'm gonna call this raw stats. So we're not going to use any of this, but we're going to use an awake. So each part is going to determine its exact value of each statistic in the awake function. We're going to go loop through our list of stats, and these are of type stat pair. So stat pair in raw stats. And then we're going to do a random number between our stat pair minimum stat value and stat pair max value. So we have a public class weapon stat pair, and this has some statistics, so that's one of these. So for example, let's say this one is damage, then it has a minimum value and a maximum value. So now I can, to each part, I can give a minimum and a maximum value. So let's say this is damage with a minimum value of 5 and a maximum value of 15. Then in the awake function of this weapon part, we're going to go through all the stats that we have, because one part could have multiple statistics, so it could have damage and accuracy. And then for each part, we're going to look what values were set up. So we're going to look at the minimum value and the maximum value. And we're going to pick a random number between these. And this is the chosen value. And this is then the final statistic for this weapon part. So let's go to Unity and let's use this scope for now. I'm going to add the weapon part script to it. And you can see that there is a list now that says raw stats with a size of 0. If I add 1 to this, I open this, and here you see our enum. So it has our damage, accuracy, ammo per clip, reload speed, and fire rate. And you can see a minimum value and a maximum value. So let's say, well, it's a scope. It should not do damage. Let's change this to accuracy. Let's say the minimum value is 1 and the max value is 5. So if I press play now, it should give us a value between 1 and 5. And here we go. We have a value of 1.2. Let's start again, see if it changes. Value of 2.5. So This is working on awake. As soon as the game starts, this weapon part is gonna go through its list of statistics and it's gonna determine a random value between its minimum and its maximum. And I can also add multiple values to this. So if I add 2 statistics here, let's say one is accuracy, one is damage. Doesn't make sense for a scope, but doesn't matter for now. Let's say the damage is between 50 and 75. Press play. Now we should see 2 numbers here. So one is 2.8, which is our accuracy, and one is 53, which is our damage. So this is our weapon part. And now I also want to save the chosen value, so the final statistic, in a new list, because this is the raw stats. This one contains the min and the max value. I want to save the final value in a new, well, I was gonna say list, but for this I'm gonna use a dictionary. Because in a dictionary, we can use the weapon stat type, which is our enum, as an identifier, and this will come in very handy later on. And then a float, which is the chosen value, and I'm gonna call this stats, and I'm gonna initialize it here. And instead of our debug, I'm gonna delete this. I'm gonna say stats.add statpair.stat. And then the chosen value. So what happens in this dictionary, we're adding a statpair.stat, so that's one of these, damage, accuracy, ammo per clip, or reload speed, and then a value. So this is our weapon part for now. Now I'm gonna add this weapon part to all our prefabs. So now I added the weapon part to all our different prefabs. I'm gonna say, I'm gonna set the raw stats for all prefabs at once to 1, so that they all have some entry. So I'm adding accuracy to all scopes, and I'm just entering some values. I'll tweak these later on. Barrels are gonna have damage, 5 to 15, doesn't matter. Handles is the thing you hold. It's probably something to do with accuracy and fire rate. Let's do fire rate for now, 1 and 5. These are the magazines, so this is ammo per clip. And I don't really want these to be randomized because it's kind of weird to have a random amount of bullets. You could do this, but for now I'm gonna have the exact same number, so they're gonna be the same. So in the stocks I'm gonna add reload speed. Doesn't make sense for now, but doesn't really matter. We're gonna fix it later on. So now everything has statistics, right? All our prefabs now have some statistic. And now I'm also gonna add the weapon part to our weapon body prefabs. Because, well, the body is also a weapon part. I want everything to use the same script. And instead of adding the script to the weapon body itself, I'm gonna go to our weapon body script and I'm gonna derive here from weapon part. So that it also has all these things in there. And since weapon body is a weapon part, it makes sense. All right, now I'm gonna go back to Unity and I'm gonna generate a weapon. Here we go, and I'm gonna take a look at all our prefabs. And here you can see the body has a raw stats list. I still have to add numbers to this. And all our other parts, the stock, the handle, the scope, all have the weapon part script. But now they're all loose, right? Every part knows its own statistics, but I want some central piece of this weapon to know the statistics of every part of the whole gun so that we can summarize them. And I'm gonna use the weapon body for this. So first let's give the weapon body some statistics. Let's say it gives damage, 5 to 15. I want to have all statistics that are currently saved in weapon part to be in weapon body. I'm gonna make a new method, initialize, and in initialize I'm gonna have a list, or well, I'm gonna save to a list. So this is a list. Doesn't have to be public list, weapon part. And this is going to be my weapon parts list. And here I'm going to add all weapon parts as parameters. So I'm going to have a weapon part barrel, a weapon part scope, weapon part stock, weapon part handle, weapon part magazine. In initialize, I'm gonna say weapon parts, the list weapon parts, add the barrel, and basically everything else. So we're going to add the scope, stock, handle, and magazine. In our weapon body, we have a list of all the parts that this gun is made of. And now I want to make a new method that checks all the statistics and makes like a summary of the whole gun. I'm going to call a new method here, calculate stats. Go through the list of weapon parts. And I want to go through all statistics per weapon part. And then somehow I want to save them in a collection. Let's go through the list of weapon parts first for each. And I'm going to say weapon parts in, well, our collection weapon parts. So we're going through all our weapon parts, and in each weapon part we want to go through the dictionary we have. That to loop through a dictionary you can use key value pair, and this needs two values, the key and the value. The key is our weapon stat type and the value is a float. Stat in part dot stats, and here we can check the stat dot key and the stat dot value. So again, we're going through all our weapons, and for each weapon part we're going to loop through all the statistics it has in its dictionary, because it can have multiple statistics per weapon part. So now we need to call initialize, and we're going to use weapon generator for this because this is the one that spawns everything. After everything has been spawned, we want to call the initialize method in our weapon body. So here I'm going to say weapon body dot initialize. As you can see, initialize wants all of these components, and currently we don't have any reference to the components that it wants. And we are spawning everything here. We need to get the components of these parts. We're gonna change our spawn weapon part here, and we're gonna let this return a weapon part. And this is the thing that's what was actually instantiated. So here we're gonna return instantiated part, get component, weapon part. Now this returns a weapon part. So now here we can create a new weapon part, call it barrel, and then say is spawn weapon part, and then the list, and then the socket. And then we can do this for the rest as well. Of course, we need to change the names. And now we can give all the components this method once. So barrel, scope, stock, grip, and magazine. So now that we have this, weapon bodies initialize is going to be called, and it's going to pass on all these components of the spawned parts. All these parts are going to be added to the list. Then we're going to calculate stats, and calculate stats goes through each weapon part in this list, the type and the value for each part. So let's see if this works. I'm going to press play, press spacebar. And here you can see it spits out many values: damage 6, accuracy 0.3, reload speed 4, fire rate 1.15, ammo per clip 16. So this seems to work, but we still have one problem, because we're not saving this in any collection. So we're also going to make a dictionary here. And this dictionary is going to have the weapon stat type again, which is damage, accuracy, and so on. And the float, which is just the value of this statistic. And we're going to call this weapon stats. So these can go. Here we're going to add them to the dictionary. So we're going to say weapon stats.add. And then we are adding two things, stat.key and a stat.value, which we just used in our debug logs as well. So our statistics are now finished. Now we're going to look at rarity. For rarity, we're going to start in weapon part, and we're going to add a new enum, rarity level, and this enum is going to contain the rarity levels we have. So for us, this is going to be these ones. Now we want to have a variable of that type here. But this is in weapon part, so each part is going to have its own rarity level. And if we go to our prefabs now that we have our weapon part highlighted, you can see that we have the stats, which is the list we made earlier. And now we have a rarity level as well, which now has a drop down, and it's using our enum. we would set it up like this. Our scope 1 is going to be uncommon, scope 2 is going to be common, scope 3 is going to be rare, scope 4 is going to be epic, scope 5 is going to be legendary, and scope 6, let's also make that legendary. Alright, so that's our rarity setup. Now we're going back to code again, and we're going to go to weapon body. So what I want to do here is I want to check the average rarity of all parts together. I can do this by making a new int here called raw rarity, which starts at being 0. In calculate stats, for each weapon part we go through, I'm going to add up the rarity. So raw rarity plus is the rarity of this part. So we're going through the parts here, and I'm going to look at this part to see what rarity it has. Then I'm adding all of the rarities to one int, and later on I'm going to divide this int by the total amount of parts, which gives us the average. Parts.rarity level, which we just made, but this is an enum, and we want to use this as an int. And if we do this, the first one is going to be 0, second one is going to be 1, and so on. So in this way you can actually use an enum as an int. So now the rarity is being added up in this variable. Now we're going to make a new method, and we're going to call it determine rarity, and make sure it is called after calculate stats, because calculate stats is adding up the raw rarity. I'm going to make a new method here, determine rarity. So here we have the average rarity. We're looking at the raw rarity, which is the added up value of all our parts. And then we're looking at how big our list is. So if our list is going to be 6, it's going to be divided by 6. And since we have 5 rarity levels, uncommon, common, rare, epic, and legendary, then I'm going to clamp this value between 0, which is our lowest rarity level, which is going to be uncommon, and 4, which is our highest, which is legendary. So we make sure that it's always somewhere in between these numbers. And we do this to avoid the rarity being higher or lower than the enum we have. And once average rarity has been clamped, we're going to set the rarity for this body. And this body is a weapon part, so it also has a rarity level. And here we're going to say is our average rarity. And now we're going to set it back to the enum. And we can do this by casting it to rarity level, which is our enum. So this was still an int. And rarity level is the enum, as you can see here. The rarity level is of type enum. And this way we're casting it from an int back to a rarity level. So this is done. So now we can debug log our rarity level. Save this, going back to Unity. And here we can see that this weapon is uncommon. The next thing that I want to do is I want to add an outline to our weapon so we can actually see our rarity. And for this I'm using an asset pack called Quick Outline, which is this one. It's free, so you can just get it and throw it in your project. And now all parts need to have the outline script. So I'm going to go to my prefab folder, select all my prefabs I'm using, select all the bodies I'm using, and then add outline. With the outline script added to all the parts, if I generate a new weapon, you can see that there is a white outline. Now we're going to change this using our rarity. So we're going to go back to code. And after determining our rarity, we're going to do the following. We need to set the outline for each weapon part. So we have to loop through all parts, weapon parts, and we already have a list of weapon parts, which is called weapon parts. This was the list that contained all our parts, so the barrel, and so it's all in there. And then we're going to get the outline script by using getComponent, and outline is the name of the script. And in outline, in the script outline, we're gonna set the outline color. Let's start with yellow. So we're not looking at the rarity yet, but let's see if this works. Everything seems yellow except for the body. The body is still white, and this is because we didn't add the body to our weapon parts list. So let's do that first. When initialize is called, let's say weapon parts dot add this, because this is the weapon body script that we're using right now. So by doing this, we can add it to the list. And here we go. Now it's completely yellow. That's what we want. And now somehow we want to have rarity colors. And for rarity colors, I want to use a scriptable object. And I'm going to make one right here. I'm going to call this rarity SO, which stands for scriptable object. And to make a scriptable object, you have to use this command, create asset menu, file name is rarity colors. So this is how it shows up in the menu. I'll show you in a sec. Menu name. And these functions can go. Here we're going to say public class derives from scriptable object. And here we just want one list of type color, and this is going to be called the rarity colors. And then we're going to make our scriptable object. And now once we click the create asset menu, you see that there is a new option here, weapon generator rarity colors. Going to click this, it makes a new scriptable object called rarity colors, sure. And it has a list. And since we have 5 rarities, I'm going to make a list of 5, and I'm going to give these the colors I want. So this is going to be uncommon. Uncommon is, I think, white. I'm going to put this to white. Make sure you also set the alpha. Common is going to be green. We have blue. Then purple. And then orange. And I forgot to set the alpha, so don't forget that. Why are we using a scriptable object? Because a scriptable object is a collection of data. It doesn't derive from mono behavior. Why it is very useful is because we can use this throughout our whole project. Let's say we're making a game that has rarity and items that have a certain rarity. Then we would like our colors to be used consistently. And instead of saving them all in prefabs, you could also make a list and use colors there. But then each prefab needs to have this list. Now with the scriptable object, we're only setting it once and we're referencing it from all the scripts. If I decide to change the colors, I can just go to my scriptable object, change the color, and then it's fixed everywhere in the whole game. So that's why we're using a scriptable object. In weapon body, I'm gonna make a reference to the scriptable object. So I'm gonna say public rarity SO scriptable object. And here we're gonna say rarity SO, and then the list there with the colors, rarity colors. And this is gonna be a list. So in this list, we need to use an int, and we're gonna use our rarity level for this, but that's an enum. So we're gonna cast it back to an int. And then say rarity level. It's using this one. This one is being clamped between 0 and 4. So it has 5 options. Our list has 5 options. So it's going to pick one of the colors there. So that's the rarity in place. So what we need to do now to make it actually show is to set up all our prefabs. And for each prefab, add statistics and also set the rarity level. So I'm going to get all my scopes, and instead of damage, I'm going to set them to accuracy, because a scope changing accuracy makes more sense. And then I'm going to actually set all the values. And I'm also going to increase the values because the rarity level is higher. Now we've set up all our prefabs. Now we only have to get the reference to our scriptable objects. I'm selecting all of my bodies and I'm dragging my scriptable object here in this empty slot. Let's see what we have. Blue, which is rare of course, green, Let's see if we can get a purple. There we go. Our system seems to work. And our gun is now being generated, has a certain rarity. Each part has its own, as you can see here on the right, has its own statistics. So the stock is now having influence on reload speed, the scope for accuracy, the barrel on damage, the magazine on ammo per clip, and the fire rate, the body damage. It works, and the next step is adding a visual in the user interface to actually show a summary of our weapon. So what statistics does it have in total? For the weapon card, I took some shortcuts because we're running out of time. So I've set up this image in the UI, weapon card canvas, and as you can see, it has a couple of labels, gun name, rarity, and a couple of statistics with default values and icons for each statistic. And I've added this script to it, UI weapon card, and I'm gonna go through it real fast. So from weapon body, we also added update weapon card, and update weapon cards calls this method update weapon card and sends the type of this weapon. It gives its stats, which is the dictionary that holds the damage and so forth, and it sends the rarity level. I added a weapon type to the body. We didn't have that yet, but it's just simply an enum weapon type and a variable that holds this type. And the rest we already had, the dictionary with stats we already had, and the rarity level we also had. And in update weapon card, you see that we set weapon image and labels, and we pass on the type and the rarity. And then we do the set stat and the rarity color. But the most important one is this one, is set stats, which requires a dictionary, and it is the same dictionary we used before. It holds the weapon stat type, which is damage, rate of fire, and so on, and then the value. And then we go through this dictionary, and then in the UI, we look up a statistic that has the same type. So for example, it's going to look for a UI element that also has damage, and if the stat from the UI matches with the stat from the dictionary, so the key from the dictionary, it's setting the value of the damage, for example, to the value that's in the dictionary. I've added this weapon card canvas to each body prefab. You can see that everything is being updated. So we have this weapon card, it changes color, the statistics change, and to show you the power of the scriptable object, if I change these colors to something else, let's say rare is going to be yellow, it should update the outline and the UI card while I just changed one object. And there we go. Alright, so that was part 2 of our weapon generator series. Today we looked at adding statistics to our gun parts. They are not only randomly generated, like models, but they also have actually functionality behind the scenes. So now a gun also has unique statistics. And we also looked at adding a rarity to our gun. So now our gun can be epic or legendary or rare or the other ones. And we also added a user interface. So now a weapon has a representation in the user interface showing all its statistics. That is it for today. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something new, and please like, comment and subscribe to the channel so that we can do more of these tutorials. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.